Hey pals, hey Locan. Right, let's get to it. So what we're doing just now is a real quick stream before I start my editing stream for the day. We're going over an interview that Judith Butler has done in the New Statesman, for the New Statesman, whatever. And yeah, we're just gonna read through it, see what's up, and this is going up on the archive channel later, and then we're gonna and I'll stop the stream, come back with some editing in a bit. Okay, maybe turn that lo-fi down, or off even. Okay, here we go. Nice bizarre close-up. Good stuff. Okay, Judith Butler on the culture wars, J.K. Rowling and living in anti-intellectual times. Couple of notes on the title. Titles often aren't chosen by the writer or interviewer in this case or whatever. It's usually chosen by the editor, because it's the thing that drives clicks to the website. But what a wanky title. I just wanted to say, the culture wars is a really common framing to tell people that something essentially doesn't matter. Essentially has no material effect on anything. It's just the culture war. It's just the culture war. It's just arguing over Star Wars. It's just arguing about black people being in The Witcher. Where TERF organizing and rhetoric absolutely has a material effect on trans people, and not just on trans people, but on reproductive rights, on LGBT people in general. A Republican senator quoted J.K. Rowling while arguing, I think, against abortion, or maybe it was arguing to strip queer rights. One or the other. It's a Republican either way. Essentially the kind of ghoulish shit you'd be dealing with. What are you doing?
I have no idea where this noise is coming from. Okay.
Okay. 30 years ago, the philosopher Judith Butler, now 64, that's my mum's age, published a book that revolutionized popular attitudes on gender. Gender Trouble, the work she is perhaps best known for, introduced ideas of gender as performance, gender performativity theory, if you've heard of it that way. It asked how we define the category of women, and as a consequence, who it is that feminism purports to fight for, which is a little... okay. I mean, feminism doesn't necessarily just purport to fight for women, but okay. Today, it is a foundational text on any gender studies reading list, and its arguments have long crossed over from the academic to popular culture. In the 3 decades since Gender Trouble was published, the world has changed beyond recognition. In 2014, Time declared a transgender tipping point. What? I'll check that out later. It's an unpleasant title. Butler herself has moved on from that earlier work, writing widely on culture and politics, but disagreements over biological essentialism remain, as evidenced by the tensions over trans rights within the feminism movement. I will say a lot of articles recently, including the article I streamed about last time, kinda absolutely livid, in The Guardian, where they'd interviewed Margaret Atwood, feminist icon and hero, and they had just editorialized, adding on the opposite of what she'd said after the quotes from her, as if that's what she meant. Horrible. Stuff like that often frames this as a tension between trans people and feminists, which I guess it's at least a step better that they said tensions over trans rights within the feminist movement. Arguably fine. How does Butler, who is Maxine Elliott Professor of Comparative Literature at Berkeley, see this debate today, and does she see a way to break the impasse? Butler recently exchanged emails with the New Statesman about this issue. The exchange has been edited. So, interviewer, in Gender Trouble, you wrote that contemporary feminist debates over the meanings of gender lead time and time again to a certain sense of trouble, as if the indeterminacy of gender might eventually culminate in the failure of feminism. How far do ideas you explored in that book 30 years ago help explain how the trans rights debate... Great. I love to be a debate. Has moved into mainstream culture and politics. Okay, Butler. I want to first question. This answer is the reason I decided I would stream reading this. I want to first question whether trans exclusionary feminists are really the same thing as mainstream feminists. If you are right to identify the one with the other, then a feminist position opposing transphobia is a marginal position. I think this may be wrong. My wager is that most feminists support trans rights and oppose all forms of transphobia. That is my wager very firmly as well. Not just wager, staunchly held position. I find it worrisome that suddenly the trans-exclusionary radical feminist position is understood as commonly accepted or even mainstream. I think it's actually a fringe movement that is seeking to speak in the name of the mainstream, and that our responsibility is to refuse to let that happen. Fantastic answer. Holy shit. A fringe movement that is seeking to speak in the name of the mainstream might be familiar to people around, say, the abortion debate, or I don't know, fucking most politics. I was going to list off some stuff, but the point I'm trying to get around to is that TERF organizing has been linked back to American conservative Christian, like, evangelical money. Like, the same sort of, just it's the same sort of shit that's funding the absolute gibberish takes you hear from PragerU, from Dave Rubin. It's a fringe movement that's seeking to speak in the name of the mainstream. Kind of as if there was like a silent some kind of like the majority of people is what the mainstream is, right? And then it's like as if this fringe, you're only seeing a little bit of them, but they represent like a sort of silent whatever. Okay, let's just carry on. Interviewer. One example of mainstream public discourse on this issue in the UK is the argument about allowing people to self-identify in terms of their gender. Point of information here, J.K. Rowling's first massive TERF meltdown came 3 days after Scotland ruled that trans people would be allowed to self-identify, basically. And that's not like pushing pills on kids or some shit like this. It's just unambiguously like a win for trans people and a good, nice thing for trans people. And then she had this massive meltdown. Similarly, the British Medical Association has come out saying the same thing about half a week ago, and yesterday J.K. Rowling posted a picture of herself wearing a t-shirt with some TERF propaganda. Very cool. One example of mainstream public discourse on this issue in the UK is the argument about allowing people to self-identify in terms of their gender. In an open letter she published in June, J.K. Rowling, and I streamed reading that, so you can check out that stream too, J.K. Rowling articulated the concern that this would throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman. It's worth questioning every time what the supposed added danger of a man who believes he's a woman is, compared to the men who already attack, assault, murder women all the time, and for whom a little stick figure woman on a door does not really pose much of a serious barrier. It's worth saying that cis men murdering women is a very, very serious problem and has been for a really fucking long time, and that excluding a particular group of women who are murdered more often than average from safe spaces for women is not a good way to solve that problem. Potentially putting women at risk of violence, right? Okay. If we look closely at the example that you characterize as mainstream, we can see that a domain of fantasy is at work. Ugh, Queen. One which reflects more about the feminist who has such a fear than any actually existing situation in trans life. The feminist who holds such a view presumes that the penis does define the position, and that anyone with a penis would identify as a woman for the purposes of entering such changing rooms and posing a threat to the women inside. It assumes that the penis is the threat, or that any person who has a penis who identifies as a woman is engaging in a base, deceitful, and harmful form of disguise. You know, you could come up with a hypothetical even where like what's an evil kind of person, like a serial killer would like disguise himself as a woman in order to like get into women's spaces so he can kill them. You could come up with that in such a fantasy world defined by transphobia. This is a rich fantasy, and one that comes from powerful fears, but it does not describe a social reality. Trans women are often discriminated against in men's bathrooms, and their modes of self-identification are ways of describing a lived reality. One cannot be captured or regulated by the fantasies brought to bear upon them. The fact that such fantasies pass as public argument is itself cause for worry. I'd like to pause at this point and say, Lorcan says, that sounds like the plot of a stupid detective novel. Yeah. I hope nobody writes that. That would suck. It'd probably be a shit one, TBH. Now, I'm non-binary, but I'd just like to pull back for a moment and highlight for anyone who lives in society. For anyone who lives in society, who feels like I would be particularly safe going into a men's public bathroom? Just anyone who lives in society is allowed a take on this one, as so long as you're being honest and not being, lying scum. And who seriously thinks that I'm some danger when I need to pee? Who thinks that I would be particularly safe going in just any men's public bathroom? And who thinks that I would pose any danger to anyone if I decided to go to the women's bathroom because I just really needed to fucking pee right now? Okay. Right. Back to it. Mods, I hope you're on the chat today. Trans women are often discriminated against in men's bathrooms, and their modes of self-identification are ways of describing a lived reality, one that cannot be captured or regulated by fantasies brought to bear upon them. The fact those fox ears could trigger fight or flight instincts in chickens and other small animals, I guess. Well, hens are women too, so... the fact that such fantasies pass as public argument is itself cause for worry. What a great answer. Natalie told me that she saw somebody tweet that they'd never read an article where the interviewer had so repeatedly and mercilessly skewered the interviewee had so repeatedly and mercilessly skewered the interviewer throughout, and that's kind of a sense I'm getting two answers in. I want to challenge you on the term TERF, or trans exclusionary radical feminist, which some people see as a slur. I am not aware that TERF is used as a slur. I wonder what name self-declared feminists who wish to exclude trans women from women's spaces would be called. If they do favor exclusion, why not call them exclusionary? If they understand themselves as belonging to the strain of radical feminism that opposes gender reassignment, why not call them radical feminists? My only regret is that there was a movement of radical sexual freedom that once traveled under the name of radical feminism, but it has sadly morphed into a campaign to pathologize trans and gender non-conforming peoples. My sense is that we have to renew the feminist commitment to gender equality and gender freedom in order to affirm the complexity of gendered lives as they are currently being lived. What a fucking queen. Holy shit. I've done a couple of streams now where I've been like reading through really awful TERF bullshit. J.K. Rowling's absolutely like frankly manipulative article, TERF Wars, the Margaret Atwood interview, which I do honestly maintain Margaret Atwood should sue The Guardian for. This I just wanted to read out some good news, and this is good news. Is that the good news is that Judith Butler is a fucking queen. Okay. Interviewer. The consensus among progressives seems to be that feminists who are on J.K. Rowling's side of the argument are on the wrong side of history. Is this fair, or is there any merit in their arguments? What a weird framing of a question. Is this fair, or is there any merit in it? Let us be clear that the debate here is not between feminists and trans activists. There are trans affirmative feminists, and many trans people are also committed feminists. So one clear problem is the framing that acts as if the debate is between feminists and trans people. It is not. One reason to militate against this framing is because trans activism is linked to queer activism and to feminist legacies that remain very alive today. Feminism has always been committed to the proposition that the social meanings of what it is to be a man or woman are not yet settled. We tell histories about what it meant to be a woman at a certain time or place, and we track the transformation of those categories over time. Ugh. Sorry, I just gotta... Whoo! That's some feminism right there. Whew, that's some feminism right there. We depend on gender as a historical category, and that means we do not yet know all the ways it may come to signify, and we are open to new understandings of its social meanings. It would be a disaster for feminism to return either to a strictly biological understanding of gender, or to reduce social conduct to a body part, or to impose fearful fantasies, their own anxieties, on trans women. Their abiding and very real sense of gender ought to be recognized socially and publicly as a relatively simple matter of according another human dignity. The trans exclusionary radical feminist position attacks the dignity of trans people. I would like to go over this again. It would be a disaster for feminism to return to either a strictly biological understanding of gender, or to reduce social conduct to a body part, or to impose fearful fantasies, their own anxieties, on trans women. The latter half of that is really focusing on the trans-specific case, but this it would be a disaster for feminism to return to either a strictly biological understanding of gender. Like, this is the repeated thing you see in TERF rhetoric. Like, I shared a group that I got recommended on Facebook yesterday. It was like gender critical humans, and their like entry questions included like, what's the definition of a man and a woman? What's the difference between sex and gender? And it's like it's like this is repeatedly their position. The thing I wanted to compare it to was the leftist fear about universal basic income. Critics of universal basic income suggest that you would be creating this sort of completely inflexible class structure if you allow the ruling class to like pay off all of the working class's wages, and then like they're provided for up to a point where they can then be screwed over in very material ways by the ruling class and haven't much hope of repealing that or changing things. That's the basis of a lot of criticism there, and it's kind of very similar to think about this idea of feminism returning to a strictly biological understanding of gender, because it's like, what's your hope of like challenging things politically if you view woman as this label that just comes straight out of the XX chromosome? You know, if you view it that way, it's ridiculous. Like it's so harmful to your ability to politically organize. I was talking the other day, or I was writing in something I was working on, about the zone of non-being, Frantz Fanon's concept of how racial hierarchy is imposed with this threat of a zone of non-being, where you're rejected from any kind of valid identity. Essentially, a hierarchical system. Let me go to close up because I've still got the article up for this, and I should just okay. So you can see my gestures really close up. To be clear, it's very important. A hierarchical system that stratifies people into different classes needs people to stick exactly in those classes, and someone who tries to exist in a different one while being according to that system from the other is threatened with this zone of non-being. They're an aberration. They're an other. They just don't belong. And this is what you see with gender non-conforming people, with trans people, right? It's like men, cis men, to be clear, are threatened constantly with having their manhood revoked, but not with being granted womanhood, because being a woman is allowed within the system that places men above women. But being a man who's a woman is this zone of non-being, this right? And it's only by understanding how these categories are constructed that you can actually politically organize to create any kind of change. Let's carry on with the article. And one last thing, the TERF position attacks the dignity of trans people is one of the best, probably short sentences from this whole thing. In Gender Trouble, you asked whether, by seeking to represent a particular idea of women, feminists participate in the same dynamics of oppression and heteronormativity that they are trying to shift. In the light of the bitter arguments playing out within feminism now, does the same still apply? Can I just say yes, the TERFs are trying to stick to one definition of woman. That's the whole... All right. Anyway, Butler. As I remember the argument in Gender Trouble, written more than 30 years ago, the point was rather different. First, one does not have to be a woman to be a feminist, and we should not confuse the categories. Men who are feminists, non-binary and trans people who are feminists, are part of the movement if they hold to the basic propositions of freedom and equality that are part of any feminist political struggle. When laws and social policies represent women, they make tacit decisions about who counts as a woman, and very often make presuppositions about what a woman is. We have seen this in the domain of reproductive rights. So the question I was asking then is, do we need to have a settled idea of women or of any gender in order to advance feminist goals? I put the question that way to remind us that feminists are committed to thinking about the diverse and historically shifting meanings of gender and to the ideals of gender freedom. By gender freedom, I do not mean we all get to choose our gender, rather we get to make a political claim to live freely and without fear of discrimination and violence against the genders that we are. Many people who were assigned female at birth never felt at home with that assignment, and those people, including me, tell all of us something important about the constraints of traditional gender norms for many who fall outside of its terms. Feminists know that women with ambition are called monstrous, or that women who are not heterosexual are pathologized. The Guardian's article interviewing Margaret Atwood. I just feel like mentioning whenever possible how TERFs try to claim Margaret Atwood as a TERF hero, and she just keeps rejecting them because they haven't read or understood The Handmaid's Tale, because The Handmaid's Tale has gender criminals, lesbians, trans people, right? Has them fucking murdered. And under this system, which is like a fascist escalation of the patriarchy. Like, it's just... Anyway. We fight those misrepresentations because they are false and they reflect more about the misogyny of those who make demeaning caricatures than they do about the complex social diversity of women. Women should not engage in the forms of phobic caricature by which they have been traditionally demeaned. And by women, I mean all those who identify in that way. Interviewer: how much is toxicity on this issue a function of culture wars playing out online? Again, culture wars really is a framing that tells you something basically doesn't matter very much. Like, it's really annoying. It's just like culture wars online. Okay, well, Posey Parker has fucking followed my friend down the street. Posey Parker has fucking allied with Tommy Robinson. Posey Parker has filmed herself looking across a Black Lives Matter crowd and calling them all white liberals and talking about how it's a transgender movement because she saw a Black Trans Lives Matter sign, and like, you know, this has like real world implications and very sinister ones in a lot of cases. Am I keeping you? Do you need to head off to the union thing?
Clarion are getting there like 11:30, so I'm heading off soon, basically.
All right. All right. Right. I think we're living in anti-intellectual times. I would challenge that. I think there have never been particularly intellectual times. I find whenever people discuss this kind of thing and they talk about anti-intellectual versus intellectual times, I find that very silly. Anyway, and that is evident across the political spectrum. The quickness of social media allows for forms of vitriol that do not exactly support thoughtful debate. We need to cherish the longer forms. Interviewer: threats of violence and abuse would seem to take these anti-intellectual times to an extreme. What do you say about violent or abusive language used online against J.K. Rowling? Okay. This answer. I am against online abuse of all kinds. I confess to being perplexed by the fact that you point out the abuse leveled at J.K. Rowling, but do not cite the abuse against trans people and their allies that happens online and in person. This fucking answer, holy shit. Like, exactly. Like, holy shit. Like, yes, just exactly that. What can you say? Like, yes, why is there this absolutely bananas focus on, like, people who've gotten mad enough at someone's bigotry to like cross a line and threaten them, and that, to be clear, that's not okay. And there's not a focus on the fucking traumatic fucking ordeal of just existing as a trans person or a trans ally, both online and in the real world. Like, fucking hell. Like, oh, Jesus Christ. It's just, what a queen, anyway. It's just like, okay, interviewer, but there are, like, hate crimes happening. There are, like, fucking hate crimes happening, right? I've experienced some. Like, fucking, on a personal level, there are strained relationships by people not understanding. It shuts down your ability to live your life. Like, J.K. Rowling got abuse online, like, she shouldn't have. But she also shouldn't, like, but also, like, the fucking experience of living as a trans person shouldn't mean constant abuse absolutely everywhere, online and in the real world. I disagree with J.K. Rowling's views on trans people, but I do not think she should suffer harassment and threats. Let us also remember, though, the threats against trans people in places like Brazil, the harassment of trans people in the streets and on the job in places like Poland or Romania, or indeed right here in the US. So if we're going to object to harassment and threats, as we surely should, we should also make sure we have a large picture of where that is happening, who is most profoundly affected, and whether it is tolerated by those who should be opposing it. It won't do to say that threats against some people are tolerable, but against others are intolerable. That is exactly what this fucking question is trying to do in the framing. In this framing, you know? It's intolerable that J.K. Rowling should receive this abuse, but we all just know, right? We all just know trans people get abused all the time, harassed all the time, threatened, fucking murdered, fucking assaulted, right? We know that happens. So this is the unusual thing that's happened, is that J.K. Rowling's been receiving some abuse. And it's like, okay, but the fucking this... Okay, great answer. Fantastic answer. Interviewer: you weren't a signatory to the open letter on cancel culture in Harper's this summer. Did its arguments resonate with you? What an embarrassing fuck up that whole thing was. Butler: I have mixed feelings about that letter. On the one hand, I am an educator and writer and believe in slow and thoughtful debate. I learn from being confronted and challenged, and I accept that I have made some significant errors in my public life. If someone then said I should not be read or listened to as a result of those errors, well, I would object internally, since I don't think that any mistake a person made can or should summarize that person. We live in a time we sometimes seriously, and if we're lucky, we change precisely because of interactions that let us see things differently. On the other hand, some of those signatories were taking aim at Black Lives Matter as if the loud and public opposition of racism Oh god, she's a queen. As if the loud and public opposition to racism were itself uncivilized behavior. Some of them have opposed legal rights for Palestine. Others have allegedly committed sexual harassment, and yet others do not wish to be challenged on their racism. Democracy requires a good challenge, and it does not always arrive in soft tones. So I am not in favor of neutralizing the strong political demands for justice on the part of subjugated people. When one has not been heard for decades, the cry for justice is bound to be loud. I'm gonna cry. Okay. Oof. Exactly. This year you published The Force of Nonviolence. Does the idea of radical equality, which you discuss in the book, have any relevance for the feminist movement? Absolute queen shit. Yeah, I completely agree, Greera. Absolutely. Here we go. My point in the recent book is to suggest that we rethink equality in terms of interdependency. We tend to say that one person should be treated the same as another, and we measure whether or not equality has been achieved by comparing individual cases. But what if the individual and individualism is part of the problem? Imagine that. It makes a difference to understand ourselves as living in a world which we are fundamentally dependent on others, on institutions, on the earth, and to see that this life depends on sustaining organization for various forms of life. If no one escapes that interdependency, then we are equal in a different sense. We are equally dependent, that is, equally social and ecological, and that means we cease to understand ourselves only as demarcated individuals. If trans-exclusionary radical feminists understood themselves as sharing a world with trans people in a common struggle for equality, freedom from violence, and for social recognition, there would be no more TERFs. But feminism would surely survive as a coalition practice and vision of solidarity. Interviewer. I'm a little confused. There was one thing up here when the interviewer said, I'd like to challenge your use of TERF because some people see that as a slur. TERF or trans-exclusionary radical feminist. It might be an issue of the editing because it said that their exchange has been edited, but I don't see Butler using TERF anywhere in here. But yeah, maybe she did. Maybe she didn't go edited out. Maybe the editor is changing out TERF for trans-exclusionary radical feminist every time because they just like when something is an awful mouthful. Who knows? You've spoken about the backlash against gender ideology and wrote an essay for the New Statesman about it in 2019. Do you see any connection between this and contemporary debates about trans rights? Butler. It is painful to see that Trump's position that gender should be defined by biological sex and that the evangelical and right-wing Catholic effort to purge gender from education and public policy accords with the TERF return to biological essentialism. Thank you. In J.K. Rowling's fucking shitty TERF Wars article, she said, when explaining what a hero she is to everyone, she included that she sometimes owns Trump on Twitter. And I'm like, okay, but you're defending the way he views gender right now. That's what... Okay. Okay. It is a sad day when some feminists promote the anti-gender ideology position of the most reactionary forces in our society. I can't be clear enough that trans people are just living their fucking lives, and that it's TERFs who are practicing some kind of ideology. It is TERFs who have an ideology about gender that they are obsessed with and pushing on people and harming people with, not trans people. The only way that you make a leap from a minority simply existing and living their lives to this being an ideology that's being pushed on people is some kind of fucking conspiracy theory. Okay? You see this with immigration, you see this with Black Lives Matter, okay? The only way you make a leap is to suddenly start suggesting that the forces who are currently in power are siding with the minorities, which is definitionally not true if you understand what a minority is. For example, women are a minority and they are the majority of people on the planet, and that's because they are a minority shareholder in power in the gender hierarchy, right? They are the underside of it. So the only way that you make this leap from minority people with minoritized identities simply existing to there being some sort of danger, okay, is to suggest that they have shadowy backing, some kind of sinister cabal of some kind. We won't get too deeply into that, but it's worth noting that that is the only logical step between those 2 points. What do you think would break this impasse in feminism over trans rights? What would lead to a more constructive debate? Butler: I suppose a debate, were it possible, would have to reconsider the ways in which the medical determination of sex functions in relation to the lived and historical reality of gender. Yes, but I would say, I mean, so she said, I suppose a debate, were it possible, because, like, fuck off, basically. Like, a debate. I mean, the facts couldn't be clearer, but also Butler in this interview couldn't have been clearer. I feel that it's not a debate. Trans people just fucking exist, and these attacks on our dignity and our lives are not okay. Debate. Let's debate that. Anyway, that was some good news for once. There we go. This will be up on the archive channel if any of you missed the start. And I will come back in 5 minutes with some editing. Editing part 4 of Witchermania. And I'm going to play some more Alan Wake later too. Okay, see you all in 5 minutes. Don't go anywhere.